Well, thank you all very much, the panelists, for your comments, and I'm going to make one or two now as a result of what I've heard, and then we're going to, I think, sit here and debate the issues further with you. So please prepare your questions. Rob, I think it's very encouraging to listen to you, and I have a passage here from your chair's excellent speech on May 1, when she said the following, concluding her speech: understanding that despite the size and dynamism of our markets, other jurisdictions have different priorities and solutions, takes a conscious effort and a more expansive mindset. And weaving international concerns into the most seemingly domestic rulemaking or policy takes time. Then she said, but we understand an exclusively or even largely domestically focused regulatory approach is no longer acceptable or effective. American investors are focused on international investing in a global marketplace. American regulators must be as well, and that is what I am committed to doing, she said. I think it's a very encouraging statement from the SEC. I think we should welcome this new thinking on a substituted compliance. My question to Rob, if he has time to be with us, is how are you going to do this job? Comparable outcomes. I just like a little bit more detail about what that means. And I say that because I know you've got an army of incredibly effective lawyers inside your building by Union Station. And are they going to go, nitpicking through two sets of rules? And inevitably, if you do that, you find differences, inevitably. So what is comparable? What does that mean? And my understanding of your approach is if there are 5 segments, let's say, and 4 comply, then you would rely on the foreign regulator. If the 5th didn't, then that a jurisdiction, all those firms would have to comply with SEC rules. And here's the problem from an SEC perspective, or indeed a European perspective, is how can we allow foreign business into our markets, which from the domestic point of view has a lower set of standards. That's a competitive disadvantage, which argues pari passu, of course, for global standards and global convergence, or what I think the IIF will say, global consistency of application of those standards. So I'd like Rob to talk us a little bit through how comparable does comparable mean? Is it going to be real nitty-gritty, or is it going to be a broad and effective looking at the outcomes from an economic perspective? I like Sharon's remarks very much. A game of nudge, I hadn't heard that before. I like that. And she's right. I think she's absolutely right to say that we have not, and indeed Andrew confirmed that, we don't have a consolidated set of data. And it is extraordinary that here we are, as I said earlier, 6 years, and we don't have it. I'm asked to produce analysis of what's going on in the CDS markets. I'm glad Andrew's just told me he's 98% of the data with him, so I'll be knocking at his door for it. But that is, there are big holes in the OTC derivatives. I see all sorts of arguments coming up about proprietary data, intellectual property. I mean, let's be serious. Unless regulators, and particularly those in stress conditions, the resolution authorities, can have access to the data when they need it, at whatever time they need it, frankly speaking, I think we would have rather badly failed. My question to Sharon is this. You're right, of course, absolutely right. Politicians are the ones who are accountable. But the problem we got here is that if your calendar doesn't fit that of, let's say, the Congress, each of you, Europe, and the United States will come up with rules that will be different. And again, that is not, I don't believe in this, I don't think this is protectionist. I think it is, you're quite right, it's cultural, it's different sensitivities from different members of Parliament or Congress. So what do we do about that? Does this not lead you to some sort of symmetric timing, or I don't know, maybe that's impossible at the political level. But if it is impossible, then I think it leads you further towards the argument you're going to have to move towards global standards. In other words, this argument of timetabling is actually very important because, as I said earlier, or as Rob knows, if the Congress, SEC, whoever it is, draws up a set of rules, they're not going to want to change them a month later when the Europeans or the Americans come along and say we don't agree. Martin, very interesting, as I expected you to be, right at the frontier. The binding framework on equivalence for the transatlantic investment partnership, the binding framework, that's very bold, very bold. The idea being, I guess, that all the regulatory authorities are going to move towards some form of a framework in which I would hope, I would expect disputes. What is this binding framework exactly? I think it would be very interesting to hear from the European perspective what you have in mind, what we have in mind here. And I think, I mean, is that binding framework the new, what you call the new approach, a more, you sort of alluding to the fact that the EU-US financial markets dialogue has run its course, seen its limits, I think you said. Is this the new way forward? Let's hear something on that. Paul, I fully agree with you, Paul. I think I heard this in Asia the other day. A real dissatisfaction about European equivalency rules for clearing. This might end up in some sort of initiative, I don't know, but you're quite right to put all this in the global framework, not just because of the today problems, but because those markets are going to be massive in the future. And indeed, this EU-US convergence, one hopes, stronger convergence, this is the time to do it. This is the time to set the standards, because if you don't do it now, in 10 years' time, it could well be too late. And in 10 years' time, we might have given very bad lessons to those big emerging markets that who might say, well, the EU doesn't apply this, or the US doesn't do that, so why should we? And then what are we going to have? We're going to have a matrix of what Sharon would call a mess. We're going to have different big jurisdictions applying the rules how they like. I don't think that's in anybody's interest. And it leads you again, in my view, towards stronger global convergence. I was very depressed what Andrew said about trade repositories, as I said. This is a fundamental brick. You know, I always say in my speeches that we're trying to run it's like trying to run a nuclear power station without understanding the tubes and without any data. That's what we've got. I say that because Sharon, I believe, was a physicist in her day and still approaches many of these problems from that sort of mindset. But it is like that. We just don't know. When we look at the shadow banking system, we don't know how big it is. We don't know the interconnectivity. We don't understand the economics of all of this. Again, 6 years into this crisis. And William's plea was for a set of transparent, fair-minded, outcomes-based assessments on the equivalence side. Martin might want to comment on that. So we've got quite a lot of good discussion items here. I'm looking forward to hearing some responses.